I don't think a group ride which causes a shutdown in roads to bring attention to the news is not appropriate. I don't think that's the best way to go. I think there's certain ways to do it, such as the petition.
Welcome back to another episode of eSKATE Chat with Evolve. We got Evolve founder Jeff Anning and council member Brendon Zhu. How you doing?
It's good to be here. Looking forward to our chat.
That's it. Yeah, stoked. Hey, Brendon, Maddie.
Cool. So on this one, we're going to be talking about all things legislation, the things that are happening in Australia, pretty much branch out and talk about every aspect we possibly can. Before we get into it, do you want to give us a bit of a background on yourself, what you do, how you got involved in both the politics side of things and also electric skateboards or e-mobility?
Of course. So, yeah, I'm Brendon Zhu. I'm a councillor at Willoughby City Council. I'm an elected representative on local government, as well as, with experience working in both state and federal politics in Australia and Sydney as well. And my experience in getting involved with electric skateboards actually started last year in 2020, because I am traditionally a snowboarder when it's during winter. But of course, when COVID hit last year, there was a lot of uncertainty around that February, March period of the Australian winter ski season. And I genuinely thought that it wasn't going to go ahead, but I needed to get my fix, as all snowboarders would. And so I just did a bit of researching on what's available out there on the different devices. I wasn't as interested in the traditional skateboarding. I wasn't interested in kick pushing and the challenges there of, going up hills and being able to carve. But I stumbled on electric skateboarding. I had a friend actually who had a bamboo Generation 2 Evolve skateboard with a single motor and the orange wheels.
Awesome memories.
That's right. And, he had a lot of great memories, and unrelated to skateboarding, he had an injury in his ACL. And so he gave me that board and I was able to try it out and, replicate that carving experience. And for me, that was sufficient in how I got interested in electric skateboarding. But then I obviously recognised, being based in Sydney, New South Wales, that it wasn't legal yet to ride an electric skateboard. And so I just thought I'd use my experiences on my local council, in government, in politics and policy, to see that change happen. And so I moved a motion at our council calling on the peak body for local government in New South Wales to adopt a stance that we want to call on the state government, the New South Wales government, to legalise electric scooters, electric skateboards, electric unicycles, the whole lot of them. And so I moved that motion, and I remember posting about it on my Facebook and Instagram for my councillors page. And it was just a great reception from the Sydney community. It was shared on all the various grassroots Facebook groups. I had people messaging me asking how they can help, just saying it's great to have someone who rides and is also involved in government, who understands and is able to bring about the change that they want to see. And so I started having a few conversations with people, hearing their stories of, interaction with law enforcement, hearing about why they're passionate about riding, how much it means to them. And then, met up with a few of the businesses in Sydney, people like Ben from Ben Buckler as well, and hearing their journey and how they've tried to, bring about change. But then I realized, I should be that change that I want to see and help the community here and use my skills and experiences to be that change. And here I am now.
Yeah, that's really awesome. It's so good that you have that passion, and it's also good to have like a foot in the door, to help us achieve these goals. But I also want to know that it's great that you had the community being so responsive, but how did the government respond? How did your peers respond to, all this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for my council colleagues, it was not necessarily a shoo-in by any means. I remember there were a few concerns raised at that meeting that night about the concerns of e-scooters and electric skateboards, particularly the interaction with pedestrians and shared lanes. And, we've obviously all heard and seen stories of, let's say, the cycling community, and obviously concerns about the hire schemes of, of bikes and of e-scooters as well. And so there were concerns about, would this legalization result in, further littering of these devices, being found in trees or rivers, all those kind of things that we've seen in the past when we saw some of these schemes introduced, and trying to alleviate a lot of those concerns of the council members and my fellow colleagues on council, which in the end was adopted unanimously at a local council level.
Yeah, I couldn't see many people like littering their own devices around. I mean, that's a different story if it's like a shared scheme, like, with the bikes and sort of scooters. But those people out there who own their own device, that's never going to happen. But were there any like suggestions put forward about, how can these shared pathways, work together? Was there any positive, solutions around this?
Yeah, I was able to work out a way where what we adopted in the end obviously didn't exclude electric scooters and electric skateboards on shared pathways and cycleways. For example, in a lot of the shared pathways and cycleways at the moment, your normal push cycling is legal. And so using that as an analogy, as a starting point on if we already allow it for the bicycles, then we should allow it on the electric devices where there's even better braking systems and an easier and better way to control your speed through the motors and the remote as well, which actually leads to greater safety. If you think about a skateboarder and a traditional skateboarder, if he were to bail, or a traditional longboarder, he doesn't have a remote or a motor that will stop if he falls and bails. It goes as long as gravity will take it until it hits a tree or a power pole. And so there are also safety benefits with the introduction of a motor and a remote as well.
So before we get on to the petition and the recommendations put forward, do you want to give a brief rundown of the current state of legislation throughout the 8 states and territories in Australia?
Of course.
And what we're up against?
Yeah, so in Australia, basically road rules and transport and personal mobility devices are regulated by state governments, state and territory governments, based on our structure of government. And so in 2 of them, being Queensland and the ACT, they're currently legal to ride on both public and private property with certain defined rules such as speed limits and what you need to be wearing and safety requirements. In the other 6 out of the 8 Australian states and territories, they're only legal to ride on private property. And so they would be illegal to ride on public property, on your public footpaths, shared pathways. So really it's only legal up and down your driveways technically. And the reality is, of course, and I'm sure it's the case in many countries around the world, the way a lot of the Australian riders in these states and territories, try and use a lot of common sense and try and do the right thing and take care and be respectful of other pedestrians and riders. But at the end of the day, in terms of the black letter law, it is illegal to ride other than on private property.
Yeah, and so that's essentially what the petition is about. So the petition is calling for legislation changes nationwide. It's not just, I guess, a stand for no reason. It is actually a petition in support of a recommendation list.
That's right.
Put forward by, what was the organisation?
Yeah, so historically in Australia, the National Transport Commission is the public department and the bureaucracy that is involved with all transport and road rules. And they had been conducting a community consultation for the past year or so, past 2 years, and had open community consultation and meetings with various stakeholders. And they were proposing amendments to the Australian road rules. And how that works in Australia is, even though it's governed by different states and territories, the Australian road rules set out a template that the states and territories can follow. So, for example, the Australian road rules have, we only drive on the left-hand side of the road. We have speed limit signs that are, look like this in terms of a graphic design. So there's some sort of consistency. So when I drive from Sydney to Brisbane, it's relatively similar and consistent. And that way, once that's passed, then each individual state can then therefore ratify it into their own road rules. And so we are calling on the Transport Ministers meeting, which is happening mid-year 2021, to amend the Australian road rules to adopt the usage and inclusion of electric scooters, skateboards and EUCs, so that when that is adopted, then each state and territory can therefore ratify it on a state-by-state basis.
Do you find it interesting that only Queensland and ACT have changed the laws and have legalized it compared to the other states? I mean, why aren't we all working together as one? Why is there sort of separate?
And I think, especially in this COVID context, I think a lot of Australians have seen the importance of state governments and the power of the states. We look at the different state border restrictions. State governments have a lot of power in Australia. It's not just the federal national government. And so as a result of that, you see Queensland and ACT being front runners and leading that change. And I think a big part of that with Queenslanders just love to have fun. And action sports are a big thing in Queensland. You see it not only in electric skateboards, but you see it in your paintball and your gel ball community as well. I think it's no surprise the new sport of gel ball as well, which is like an offshoot of paintball and airsoft, is legalised in Queensland, which again is a front runner. So I think in terms of context, Queenslanders and the Queensland government.
I've got one of those guns.
Well, there you go. Yeah, and I often imagine. Would that be my next campaign after electric skateboards? But I think it goes to show different state governments just have a different context that they're working in. And Queensland, as the Queensland government, certainly love their action sports. And I think that's a big part of why it's been legalised. And I think, for example, the ACT one, a big part of that one is the concern for the environment. It's the commuter-friendly option. It's the amount of cycleways that are already so prominent that, there's so much potential for them to be used. It was just a common sense step to legalise electric scooters and skateboards as a result of that. And so I think there are certain state by state contexts which help inform, understanding what's next.
Jeff flew down to Canberra a couple of years ago now.
No, it wasn't Canberra, it was Melbourne.
Melbourne. And who did you talk to?
Yeah, it was exactly that. It was the National Road Transport Authority down there, and then every single state had their representatives. This was early 2018, I think it was, and Lime Scooters was there, and we went down and we got to present our product. There were some other manufacturers, personal mobility, like scooters. And it was really interesting. It was a debate. It was a debate first, and what are the challenges at hand here? And it wasn't about saying, no, these aren't any good. It was about, these are here to stay, and how can they fit safely, within our environment, in the public spaces. And, it was really interesting. There were like, occupational therapists there, and they were, giving their opinion from the point of view of mental health. Yeah. And I found that, quite fascinating. And then it finished, the whole day ended up finishing up, we split into groups. There were groups of probably 8, and it was like, what can we devise a set of laws, and how can they sort of fit in, and each group put their own laws forward, recommendations, and it was really interesting, and especially the mains roads and the governing officials. I felt a little bit intimidated being there, and I got put on the spot actually by the transport minister from New South Wales, and he was asking me questions because we had our product there and on display right before the day started, and then we just put our best foot forward. Here's our product. We made this brochure, had it on display, and it was just straight up, this is what we think. It should be speed, it should be safety, it should be where you can and can't ride, it should be policed. I ended up getting grilled by this guy about the power of the device, and we had a bit of a debate around, on the roads at the moment, you've got different cars that can go any speeds, but it's up to the user to be sensible and use their device safely in the public space. And so I really think that's the way forward. Technology is changing so quickly, especially in our space, and powers of motors, where you put the motors, the battery technology, and so if you're really starting to focus on the performance, I think trying to police that moving forward is going to be really tough for the the authorities. So
a lot of the recommendations you put forward back then actually made their way into this document. The recommendations, it gave 4 different options.
That's right.
Do you want to run through just some of the key top level, what we're suggesting or what they're suggesting and what we're trying to agree with?
Of course, yeah. So with any legalization of devices, you'll see it takes time because of the detail. And so on one hand, you can legalize it, but what does that look like? So one of the things with the various options they had were, if you had, let's say, the most restricted way to ride it is, well, one, you could legalize it, and then you could have these speed limits of, let's say, 10 kilometers per hour everywhere. Now, that's obviously not going to be appropriate for a lot of our riders where it's that excessive and that overregulated. And on the other hand, on the other end of that spectrum, you could obviously have it legalized, but then have no speed limits at all. And again, that was probably something that would be inappropriate for a lot of the authorities to do. And so what they've come up with the submission, with your contribution, is that at the moment, what they're leaning towards for adoption is on shared pedestrian and cycling pathways. There's a speed limit of 10 kilometers per hour. And then on dedicated off-road cycling lanes, that'd be 25 kilometers per hour. And so at least on a public setting, there are those speed limits so that they can take into account, of course, safety, other users of the pathways. And of course, on private property, then there'd be no speed limit because, you go however fast you want to go on your own private property. And so at the moment, that's kind of like the model road rules that are most likely to be legislated. Obviously, each state government, when they ratify it, they can tweak it and change it. Those are only recommendations. They might read it and go, that's a bit too lenient. We might want to tighten up here. Or they might go, that's too much, and we want to have a bit more freedom for our riders. And then there'll be other things as well such as helmet laws, as well as things like lights for night riding. That's one of the recommendations as well, having those appropriate lights for night riding. And, other states and other jurisdictions sometimes have things like having a ringer or a bell as well, similar to a bicycle.
I was going to say, so realistically, we're just saying more or less we need to be classed as a bike. So there's a lot of similarities in how it's used. And we're just looking to be recognized under the law. So that helps us know what to do, and also people that are choosing or regulating it. The petition itself is, I guess the purpose of that, right, is not to say, hey, legalize us, make a big stand. It's to show that the community of riders itself actually is agreeing that there should be some rules, and we are wanting to be recognized. So definitely there'll be a link below if everyone can go and sign that. It shows the government that, hey, we want to move forward in this direction, so then we can enjoy our products the way that we want to be doing
in a safe environment, and for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, me and Jeff have done another podcast episode where we speak about this in depth. But yeah, I think people need to realize that the way forward for all of us is some rules that we can work within.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I think the reality is it's the appropriate and the right amount of regulation for the industry, which will allow it to go forward and to continue to flourish.
Yeah, cool. What are the external benefits? Once this is legalized, what are we going to see? I know COVID's shone a light on a lot of things. We spoke about it beforehand. Let's run through some of the benefits of personal mobility.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we all want to get outside and have fun. And that's the biggest benefit I see, to getting from A to B without worrying that you're going to, run into any issues and trouble from police. But just the mental health, the fact that you can get out there and be free and get from A to B is a huge one for me, I think.
Yeah, and I think the way I explain it to the various stakeholders I engage with, talking about the legalization campaign, it's great that there's a diversity of different people who ride for different reasons. A lot of them are for mental health reasons. A lot of them are for a low carbon emitting alternative. A lot of them want to avoid, a packed public transport system because of COVID. A lot of people want to ride because, they're not as physically fit as they used to be, and they can't be a traditional skateboarder where they're required a kick push. And so this allows them to transition. I hear stories of people transitioning from other physical injuries and illnesses, and electric skateboarding allows them to become active again. And so there are certainly a lot of physical and mental health benefits, good for the environment as well. But overall, I think there's a lot that we will see. And as the industry, we're just, at the beginning here, and it will continue to become mainstream.
Yeah, and there's just more and more congestion, you know, in a city. You know, you're talking about Sydney, and there's hard for parking, you know, expensive for, you know, how much does it cost to park in a public car park in Sydney?
You could be looking at $20-$30 for an hour.
Jeez.
Just for a quick meeting.
Yeah, see, I mean, that's crazy, plus the cost of the car.
Yeah.
You know, just the transportation benefits, the recreation opportunities. It's getting more and more popular. It isn't going away. Yeah. So
it is inevitable. That's the thing. Whether the laws are keeping up or not, this is happening, and we see that all around the world. So it's important the laws keep up as best they can, and then do it in a way that is gonna future-proof it, so that when new vehicles come out, because they will, it's a way to govern that.
Yeah, 100%. And future-proofing, it needs to be policed, and it needs to be safe. And to me, it's just a simple set of rules that people can go about their day, and the police can certainly stop those people from doing stupid stuff, you know, on the footpaths, on the roads, and you know, and not get backlash.
There's been an article that came out this morning, and it was published by the Victorian Police, and they are doing a bit of a crackdown on South Bank in Melbourne, which is a high congestion area for foot traffic, like very busy, restaurants, the whole works. It has a 10-kilometre speed limit because there's so many people. I think we all agree that's fair enough. So they have radars out, and they're policing that. The side of it that is getting a bit of negative feedback is that the crackdown on electric vehicles, they are technically illegal there. So they're allowed vehicles under 200 watt or something like that. So while a bike can fly through there and get done for speeding, an electric vehicle's not even allowed to go through there. I think if we look at it and say, you just have to adhere to this speed limit, when you are caught, it's clear what you've done. There's a rule that you've broken, the same as anyone else, and it's in the interest of protecting public safety. What happens when that headline hits the news and there's all this, it's not clear what's going on, there's all this, it seems unfair because the regulation's not quite right, that creates a lot of negativity. And you see it on these posts. Every time a scooter gets impounded, there's just floods of comments talking about negatively about authority, and I think that's something that could easily be avoided.
It must be so hard for the police as well. I'm just trying to put yourself in their shoes, you know, trying to do your job, and man, the crap that they would cop as well. Of course, they have to use their discretion, but you know, if I was the police and I had a clear framework and it was easy to do my job, and then everyone would be stoked and go about their day, and you know, and have fun on these, on whatever they're doing, whether it's getting from A to B or just going for a cruise or a carve.
So the negative pushback people are having towards law, we see that a lot in the eSKATE groups, especially in other countries where the laws are even harsher. How long do you think realistically it's going to take to get these things passed in Australia? Like what's the political process that us skaters aren't privy to?
Yeah, so I reckon for Australia, we have a mid-year meeting with all the transport ministers, all the state and federal transport ministers, to talk about those amendments to the Australian road rules. And then if that gets passed, so what that needs, it needs a unanimous vote from all the transport ministers to agree to it. And then if that gets passed, then each state and territory will then have to adopt it and ratify it in their own state parliament. And so that process could then take another, 6 to 12 months. I think realistically, if we get a good outcome in this mid-year meeting in 2021, I think you're looking at each state, one by one. We're just knocking it off like dominoes in 2022 is probably where I kind of see the timeline.
So if one of the states decides, no, I don't like this, then that's it.
That's it for the amendment to the Australian road rules. And so it can still be, legalised in a state-by-state basis, such as Queensland and the ACT. It just obviously makes it a bit more difficult, and you lose a lot of the momentum that we would have had if they voted yes. So it's not fatal, but I'd much prefer a yes at this mid-year meeting, because that will build a lot. It will just snowball from there.
Awesome. What's you being in this system, how does it affect these changes getting processed once you follow the correct procedure, as opposed to a lot of people making noise on a Facebook group?
I think the reality with my experiences is there are always, better strategies to go about seeing that political change in policy than others. There are always some ideas that are better than others. I think in our Australian climate and the context that we're in, especially with eSkateboarders, I don't think a group ride which, causes a shutdown in roads to bring attention to the news is not appropriate. I don't think that's the best way to go. I think there's certain ways to do it, such as the petition, such as meetings with ministers and members, such as writing letters. Though at times they might seem like, we've achieved no result there. We sometimes hear from people who say they've written to transport ministers to no avail. I think I've realized that with a lot of things in politics and policy, if you don't mention your issue, then it becomes a bit of a vacuum and it won't be on their agenda at all. And so there's obviously a lot of competing interests during this time of the pandemic, and there's a lot, that is distracting the government. But I think given that they're already going to be meeting in this mid-year meeting, it's important for us to maintain that momentum and to keep up the pressure on them.
I mean, it'd be really good to, get these ministers to really talk to the people, the users of these PMDs, and really understand, even for themselves to start using one and fall in love and see the benefits, But, we have all these group rides, yes, and you see all these people are sharing a passion and a reason for being there. But if we can get them, telling their stories to, with each other and having the minister involved and understanding more, I think, surely that's going to be beneficial.
Yeah. And so in February, we've had a couple of people meet with the federal member here in Sydney as well. And then I'm organising another one with one of the senators in federal parliament for March. And so, those are the type of meetings that we're looking for, and having that conversation. And I guess, having the right strategy for that. It's not as simple as saying, this is good for the environment. I think it's not as simple as saying, this will increase business. Because, I'm sure there are a lot of illegal devices, if they were legalized, could create business and economic activity as well. And there are certain substances that could also do that, but, it's not necessarily the way to go all the time. And so I think it's using those strategies, using the right tact to see that change.
Yeah. I mean, what about the ministers also talking to manufacturers and resellers of these devices? Do you think that's a good way to try to talk to them about the type of people and how they're using it, and who are these people? Yeah.
So one of the things I've been working on, and you've been on board helping us with as well, is the joint letter, the open letter that's, non-partisan and just open to the ministers from all the different brands, from all the industry leaders, from the different retailers, manufacturers, distributors. And one of the big things that we're emphasizing is that in Australia, we're in a unique position where a lot of our brands and thought leaders are Australian and leading the way. We look at Evolve Skateboards as a great example of that, leading the electric skateboarding industry as a whole. We look at the people that we know on YouTube who are sharing content and reviewing it, and a lot of them are Australian as well. And we're very proud of that fact that Australia has been a starting point for manufacturing, for distribution, and for all the thought leaders and the influencers as well, and demonstrating to the ministers that it would be a shame for these laws to not go ahead, where our country has a lot to be proud of with the entire industry as a whole. And we want to be making that case to the ministers as well, of that we know, and we've been putting them in contact with Australian distributors, Australian manufacturers, and Australian retailers who are leading not only in Australia but internationally. And I think Evolve Skateboards is a great example of a brand doing that.
You hit the nail on the head. We're sort of a forefront industry leader in terms of our country and what's happening here. We definitely see some other countries starting to make moves, going in this same direction, and it would be a shame to fall behind the 8 ball. How much do you look at international countries and their system of governments to bring attention to what we're doing here, or use recommendations, stuff that's worked over there that's been proven out? Is that something that you do?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of what we call the comparative approach. and there is no need to, so to say, reinvent the wheel. And there's a lot to learn from other jurisdictions as well. So, for example, I think there's an organisation in the UK called Rideables, and they, represent all the different devices. They're not exclusive to one, and they have a similar approach to what we're trying to do as well. And we drew a lot of inspiration from them. We look at different countries and how they approach, the various introductions of trials, of schemes, of different brands and boards. And we look to countries that have similar constitutional structures. So, for example, in America, they're a very states-driven constitution and federalism as well, similar to Australia. And so that is more appropriate for us to use. We try and learn from the UK experience as well, but we recognise, for example, in the UK, they don't have a state government. They just have councils and they have the federal government. And so there are things that we can use that is appropriate for our context, but not all of it will be appropriate all the time. And so, we're always looking at different ideas of different countries and how they're doing it and what we can learn from their experiences to be able to apply it here as well.
It's just, I keep, thinking about this. You need as much help as you can get. You need so much support from different brands, different influencers. And I think, even talking to other people in other countries and hearing their stories, surely this is going to help sort of influence what's happening here. So, I mean, what more help do you need? Like what's the goal? What do you need to get by mid-year?
Yeah. So a big part of that, of course, is the petition. It's having and ensuring that everyone who has an interest signs it and also distributes it. Share it to all your friends. Tag your mates, and send the link to your friends who haven't signed it yet, or for all the brands to get involved with sharing and distributing into your newsletters, your social media accounts, and your channels. And Volve have been really great with doing that so far.
Who's going to see this petition? Like at mid-year, once we get to a final number, and hopefully it's bigger than what you thought it was going to be, providing everyone gets behind it. But at the end of the day, when we get to that, who do you give this petition to? Who's going to read it?
So the key people at the moment, it's addressed to the Senate of Federal Parliament in Australia, so they'll certainly get a copy of that, and the signatories as well, and the amount of signatures that we have, and showing them that. And then the other ones, of course, will be able to at least demonstrate and use that quantitative figure to show each transport minister. They'll be at the meeting, at the mid-year meeting, and then we can certainly share the data and the amount of signatures in particularly on an electorate by electorate basis to the backbenchers. We want to show each individual MP that you have X amount of people who have signed this petition in your seat. This is not just nationwide. This is not just in statewide. This is literally in your electorate. There is, 100, 200, 300, 1,000 signatures in your seat and that has an interest in electric skateboarding or electric scooters, whatever it might be. And so, these are your voters. And so that's what we want to be able to demonstrate and show the members.
Love to be a fly on the wall at that meeting mid-year and just hear the topics. It's like, why should we legalize this? And, what are the pain points? And I'd love to, it's almost like you need some spokespeople there at the meeting to then, if there's any questions, like try to answer them and relieve their pain, Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that, Evolve's obviously been doing as much as we can in using our platform to promote to our user base. What else can we do? For example, in Sydney on the 13th of next month, we have a demo day. It is for customers to come and try boards. But is that something where we could reach out to whoever is influential in that area? That's probably yourself. To come down and actually see what it's all about. Is that
talk to the people? What
else could Evolve do other than blasting marketing, essentially?
Yeah, so marketing, of course, would be the big one. But beyond that, I think one of the next steps that we want to obviously do is have some sort of industry partnership with the brands, with the manufacturing distributors, to help fund the next steps of the campaign. Things like the social media outreach, things like creating viral content to encourage people not only to sign the petition, but to share their stories, but even beyond that, to grow the industry as a whole. And I think there's a case for, the brands such as Evolve getting behind a campaign that will grow the industry as a whole in a way that's just objective, in a way that is good. For example, I like to use the model of, we see, every Australia Day, the pork industry release an ad about eating pork, and they go viral and they're great. And, you know, they're not by a particular...
Usually lamb, isn't it?
Or lamb as well. They're not... Yeah, and we saw the one this year about, you know, it was a great viral ad about borders, and it was a bit satirical on that. But, you know, that wasn't by a particular land farmer or a particular brand. It was just one for the industry. And that's what we want to see, is that we just want to grow the industry in Australia. We're very proud of all the social media influencers. We're very proud of all the Australian brands as well. And we just want to grow the amount of participants in the industry as a sport. We want to be able to encourage more and more people to take it up. And so I think there's a place for all the industry partners to get together and to work collaboratively to grow the industry, and certainly supporting it in not only in terms of the marketing, but a financial capacity as well would be a great contribution.
It was the first time I've heard the word sport used in this podcast, which I find that interesting. Do you think, you know, the developing of the sport will get more attention?
Yeah, well, I've drawn a lot of comparison as someone who follows the Formula One, and more recently with Formula E, which is the electric version of the Formula One. And you see there that the sport is good for the industry as a whole. The sport is good because it leads to the innovation of products to be able to compete, but also leads to it becoming mainstream. And a lot of the people, you know, are able to see the capabilities, that it's not just some chunky thing that's lying on the side of the road that you need to just be able to pick up or, you know, see thrown in a river. You recognize when it's used in the capacity of sport, the ability for it to accelerate and also to brake safely, the ability for it to turn and to carve, the ability for it to get airtime in a way that's also safe. And so sport is a big part of any manufacturing industry as well, and in particular in motorsports, which I would characterize this. And you see that in the founders of Formula E, you see that in the founders of Extreme E and the Formula One as well. And I think there's a lot to learn from those experiences as well. And so I'm excited for, you know, that next step as well for the industry.
Awesome.
A lot of what we're talking about is essentially e-vehicles hitting the mainstream.
Yeah, and I think when you develop good content, you know, my dream that I often have for those who follow the Formula One and the recent Drive to Survive Netflix series is if we can create content like that as well for electric skateboards, for the micromobility space. You know, the amount of people who are just mainstream followers as a result of content like that, of documentaries and marketing like that, there is that potential as well for us, and that it's not exclusive to those industries.
We've got some work to do. This is inspiring, exciting. I can't wait for the future, and that's what our plans are. We want to innovate, we want to drive, and yeah, the sport behind it is definitely a big key.
Yeah, I might have created a need to double your marketing team, Matty.
Yeah,
for the future.
Going to keep me busy anyway. Nah, that's all in the plan. Like that's everything you sort of said. We want to do what we can to be behind the change, be behind the growth of e-vehicles. We want to be one of those forefront characters. So when we look back in 10 or 20 years, it's evolves synonymous with e-vehicles.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to draw, and I think that's what I've learned from this experience as well, from the existing sporting organisations that are already there. So, for example, we drew a lot of comparison and inspiration from your Oz Cycling, you know, Cycling New South Wales, you know, your Ski and Snow Australia as well. And, you know, the events as well, I'm sure you draw a lot of inspiration from, whether it be cycling events, you know, you've got your mountain bikes, you've got your track cycling, you've got the snowcross, the motocross. You know, there's different permutations and combinations, whether you want to do team-based racing like you do in cycling. It's just the starting point. You know, I think the industry is trying to figure out what would it look like to have appropriate races as well and sporting events. You know, where can we draw inspiration from? Which ones do we want to go ahead with? Which ones are not as appropriate for us? But, you know, there's still, you know, a lot of people all over the world are trying to experiment with different sporting events. And so there's great potential there moving forward.
This is definitely segueing into the next topic, I feel.
We'll have to get you back and talk about
Oh, yeah, mate. Talk
about some sports.
Yeah, how can we align local governments and sponsoring some of our events? And we've got big visions, and yeah, that'd be pretty wicked.
It would be awesome to do, electrical festivals type situations. get help with. I know government locations could really help. Being able to get permits to do, usage in other areas. I know that's something we were talking about doing in Germany for the 2020 World Cup that unfortunately had to get cancelled. But we were going to do a demonstration there because legislation is a tough one in Germany. But I think, things like that where the government's actually willing to get involved to bring more light to what needs to be changed.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of legalization as well, not only for the riders with what we mentioned about physical and mental health as well, but we're seeing there are obviously challenges in running events, in running races where it's currently illegal, and we're finding that in the states and territories where it is illegal, where trying to get things like insurance for events, trying to get go-karting companies to come on board for allowing us to use their venues, for councils as well to be able to use their venues or pump tracks or wherever it might be. The legalization will lead to those benefits where it would help our industry get insurance, not only for events, but for a public liability and a general individual user membership based approach as well as the ability to therefore have more and more races at different public venues, which you might have been precluded from using previously.
Generally for us, we have to go through a process to get insurance, and it's not easy, and we often get away with it, but it always comes under our banner and some of the logistical challenges that we have with these location owners, and so more recognition would certainly assist.
Absolutely.
Cool. So let's finish her off with, what is the calling point? If anyone's got to this stage of the podcast, they should definitely have signed this petition. So we'll leave that link below. People should not only go sign it, put your name on it, but also share it. The more people we can get doing this is definitely going to be better for everyone. Also, if you got to this stage of the podcast, show us that you're loving it. Give us like the big thumbs up, drop a comment. Let us know where in the world you're watching it from as well, and let us know the state of the laws there and what you need to see changed.
Yeah, and I just want to thank Brendon for coming all the way up here to talk to us. The whole process, understanding. It's not easy trying to make change, and it's awesome that you're so passionate and driving it. And we need more guys like you, and you need the support from everyone. So if you're out there, sign the petition, and man, well done. Thanks.
That's right. It's my pleasure, and thank you again to both yourself and Maddie as well for your support, the conversations we've been having on various social media channels and the back and forth messaging that we've had. It's been great to have you on board and supporting the work that I'm doing, and I think together, it makes the industry a powerful voice.